This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm David McDonald.
I'm Nate Blayton.
And I'm Sam Merciers. And joining us this week is very prolific composer and educator Ronald Bruce Smith. He is currently on the faculty at Northeastern University, where he is a professor of technology and composition. But more importantly to us, he has a piece in the upcoming season launch concert for the Boston Modern Orchestra project. The concert is called Surround Sound, which is for orchestra with electronics. And we didn't get a really accurate description from about what that entails, and that's what I'm curious to find out. Ronald, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So it's there's a lot of ways to take this description that I'm reading that I got from BMOP. It just says surround sound, and it says it's going to be orchestra with electronic sounds. Could you give us some detail on what that's going to entail?
Well, I know what my piece entails. I can have a general idea what the others entail. David Felder, who of course is at University of Buffalo, he's been there for a while, and I guess a lot of people know him through June in Buffalo. Has a piece that I think it was a co-commission with BMOP and several orchestras, and it's a long piece. It's 52 minutes, and that is really surround sound. I think there's an 8-channel surround system for that one. Mm-hmm. My piece is older. It's from the year 2000, and it's not surround sound. I have the loudspeakers inside the orchestra, it's more for a timbre blend with it. And Anthony DeRitas' piece is a bassoon concerto, and I think there's this live processing happening with the bassoon during the performance.
Okay.
That's also not surround. The speakers are on the stage for that one as well.
Sure. Well, I actually like the fact that we seem to be getting 3 different takes on this. One surround, one where you're just amplifying the direction coming from the orchestra already, and one with signal processing. I was actually wondering if there was going to be any signal processing involved in any of the performances.
I don't know about David Felder's piece. I think that might be fixed, like a tape part.
Yeah, right.
My piece uses a MaxMSP patch that does do live synthesis, but it's not doing live processing of the orchestra.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So, and this piece was premiered back in 2000?
That's right, yeah. Yeah, November 2000, yeah.
Okay, is there a commercial recording available of it already?
No, there isn't. We're going to be making that with BMOP on following the concert.
Yeah, well, that's what I was getting at. They do make very good recordings, and I hope to hear all of these pieces after the concert is over.
Yeah, they seem to have kind of a mission around getting these recordings so that people outside of Boston that can't, be at that one thing get to hear this music that, we talk about all the time, how we just don't know what's going on in other places because it's so hard to get to all the people that are making interesting music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true, and it's also, some ensembles can put up clips of what they've done, but depending on, various union agreements and whatnot, it's hard to put up full pieces. Or if you do get them up, to have them up for prolonged periods of time. So this recording project that BMOP embarked on for almost a decade ago, I think, is quite important.
Absolutely. I'm wondering, in the recording, is it going to be, so you have loudspeakers on stage for the actual live performance. Mm-hmm. Is that the way it's recorded? In other words, you could take whatever the audio that you're supplying, it could be plugged straight into the recording. I'm just curious.
Right. I think I was thinking about this. I haven't spoken with the engineer yet about it, but I think the best thing would be to take a feed. Basically, there's a keyboard player who controls the electronics, and so they can shape the electronics through, MIDI foot pedal, volume pedal, and also through pitch bend, continuous controllers. You can change pitch and also dynamics, so you can really make it sit within the orchestra. So that you could take a live feed, a feed directly from the audio unit into the recording itself, and I think that's probably the way to go with it. So you can have it, in the mix with the recording, but then could also have a track with the feed coming directly from the electronics, and then balance that afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's probably kind of standard issue with these kinds of things.
Yeah.
So it's really there is a performer controlling a MaxMSP patch during the performance.
Yeah, yeah, there is, and so there's a couple of things. There are two keyboards. One keyboard is basically just changes the event or the program changes within the patch. The other one is just used as a regular keyboard. So where they can play, actual pitches and rhythms and these sorts of things on them. So that's basically the idea. One passage, maybe about 3/4 of the way through, there's this long descending figure or pattern texture that the whole orchestra eventually joins in, but also the electronics. And for that, we basically, what I did is it's a long MIDI sequence, and to keep that in time, there's just a controller number 64. It's basically an on-off switch that the keyboardist taps, and through tapping that, she can follow the tempo of the conductor. It's just a running average. So you're basically taking it's like taking time 1, 2, 3, dividing it by 3, 2, 3, 4, dividing it by 3, and that sort of thing. So you just get the tempo through that. So it's not obviously not going to be exact, but it's within the context of the piece at that point. It's really close, so you wouldn't notice the little bit of couple of milliseconds where it's going to lag.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting to me because it's sort of like a fixed media accompaniment that then you bake in some musical control too. I don't know that I've ever heard. I mean, it's an obvious thing to do, I guess, but I've never heard of anyone doing that before. It's really interesting.
Yeah, there's that one side, and then there's other sides where you are getting like live synthesis and the control coming off of continuous controllers as well. So.
Cool. You don't happen to have a picture of the MaxMSP patch you could show us? Nate is a big MaxMSP nerd, so he would love to see it.
Well, I could send a screenshot to you, but if you want, actually, there's a video when the piece was premiered 14 years ago by the Berkeley Symphony. It coincided with it was just serendipitous that Tech TV from Seattle, they were doing a segment on computer music centers in California. It was just a coincidence. So they were excited, of course, that this piece was happening, so they came and filmed a dress rehearsal. And so you can see, I have a clip of that on my website with the piece. So you can see that excerpt from Tech TV from 14 years ago, and you can see how the foot pedal works, actually, that I just described.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, that will be in the show notes. Actually, when I did a search for that stuff, I found a page that looks like it's got all that stuff too that's attached to Berkeley.
Yeah,
so cool.
Yeah, it's probably Center for New Music and Audio Technologies at Berkeley.
That's it. CINMAT.
CINMAT, yeah.
Cool. Well, we'll have a link to that in the show notes.
Great.
So you were telling us earlier before we came on the air that you're working on a new string quartet right now for the Del Sol String Quartet, which, as you can see on your website, you've already had 2 string quartets, or more maybe, 2 at least, for the Del Sol String Quartet, and those guys are no slouches. So tell us about the new piece you're working on.
Well, the new piece, it's actually a quintet. It's for guitar and string quartet, and that came about. I started working with David Tannenbaum maybe about 8 years ago, and that was also because of the Center for New Music and Audio Technologies. It came off of a commission that they gave me the short story is that they had a research partnership with Gibson Guitars in the late 90s into about 2003, 2004, and part of that involved building a suite of digital effects. And they did that, they basically put that together in MaxMSP. And they had a couple of local jazz guitarists work on these things at the same time, and they did some performances with it. But they wanted another take on it, so they asked me if I'd be interested in writing a piece, and with who. So I said I'd be interested, and I said, David Tannenbaum is basically game for anything, and he lives, just down the street, essentially. So I called him. He was up for it. we worked through some stuff, and then I was like, well, I didn't really see myself using standard types of effects for a classical guitar piece in electronics. So I wasn't really interested in using, distortion effects, these sorts of things that you would find in a really an electric guitar type of suite.
Right.
But so I wound up just really working on my own patches for the piece and wrote these 5 pieces for guitar and electronics. And he was he took to them, which was nice, and he still plays them. And then I also was working with the Del Sol, and he came up to me maybe about 3 or 4 years ago and said, hey, there's a growing body of repertoire for guitar and string quartet. I didn't know that. And he sent me a long list of pieces that have been written over the past 20 or 30 years and said, well, why don't we think about doing something? Really like to do something with the Del Sol. I said, well, that would be great. So when I was out in California about 3 years ago, we met, and it seemed like a good idea. So we went for it, and fortunately, we got funding through the Kusavitsky Foundation for the piece. So that's what I'm working on right now. And it's a longish piece. It's over 20. It'll be over 20 minutes when it's done. So.
So when is that going to be premiered? Is there a date for that yet?
Yeah, it'll be done in the 2015-2016 season. So a little over a year from now.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, taking notes so I know what to have in the show notes afterwards.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
So I'm wondering how you were originally approached by the Boston Modern Orchestra to include your piece. Did they just cold call you, or how did that come to pass?
Well, I had Gil Rose. I'll try to remember the history here. He got a hold of me maybe about 2 years ago about talking to me about projects, and so we decided at that time he was interested in me writing a piece, not for full orchestra, but for, let's say, sinfonietta size, something about the size of John Adams' chamber symphonies, this maybe 20, 21 instrument type size. I think his idea was that he was interested in, they're recording the John Adams pieces, or they have recorded them, and I think he's interested in being able to tour some of this stuff, and to be able to do that, you can't do it with a full orchestra. It's just too expensive. So it might be better. And so we were to use a reduced instrumentation. And so we talked about that, and so that's a project that's going on. That I'll be writing at some point a piece for looks like 21 instruments, about 20 minutes in length. And then we had other conversations about some of my other repertoire, and then he was interested in Constellation, and then I don't know, sometime in the summer he said, he'd like to make this work over the season, and then it turned out that the best place for him to put it, this concert, was at the beginning of the season. So that's essentially how it went. So.
Well, we're all very excited to hear it. Dave, were you saying something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about writing for orchestra and electronics. It's, I think, an interesting problem to tackle. I think usually when I think about writing for acoustic instruments and electronics, I'm thinking about soloists or very small chamber ensembles with electronics, and it's relatively easy to see how electronics can complement a very limited palette of acoustic sounds, right? If I'm writing for flute and electronics, or your example of guitar and electronics, there are lots of things that flute can't do by itself or the guitar can't do by itself, and then I can complement and fill in that space with the electronic sounds. But an orchestra has so many sonic possibilities. How do you figure out what sorts of things are appropriate to bring some electronic sounds into? So I guess, how do you think about pairing those two sound worlds?
Well, yeah, that was the challenge, because you have everything already in the orchestra. So one thing that I was interested in at that time was this idea of orchestration, and which basically comes from the 18th century, this idea of brightening sounds by doubling up octaves. Okay, so you're basically just in a way latching onto upper part harmonics, like second, fourth harmonic, and so on, and brightening the sound, and that gives it it's a subjective brightness by doing that. And this was extended in the early 20th century by composers like Debussy and Ravel. I mean, there's a famous passage in Ravel where you have those spectrally spaced triads in the bolero, and so it's about maybe 6 minutes into the piece. It's a very striking moment. And then, Messiaen played with these ideas as well. So I thought, well, what would it be like to actually get some really precise tunings and extend those partials up? So about 30 seconds into the piece, you hear trombone plays a G sharp below middle C, and then it's doubled up 2 octaves in the oboe. And above that, you have strings playing upper partials on that G sharp, and then the electronics playing even higher partials that are precisely tuned. So it's a way of just brightening or orchestrationally highlighting these particular pitches. In a way, it's also, you get similar sorts of things in some of the music of some of the last pieces of Claude Vivier. He did similar sorts of things, not with harmonic spectra, but with difference tones. So the idea was, it's been around for a while, so it's just my take on that idea. And it felt like that was a good way to use the electronics because you get very, very precise tunings with it.
That's interesting. Yeah. It's the way you describe it is very subtle. You're not, and that's not the way I would think about writing. For example, those solo instruments and electronics is not being. Nate, you're laughing at me. You think I don't have the subtle club in my bag? Is that what you're laughing at?
I'm just remembering some other orchestra and electronics pieces I've heard, which are far from subtle, where the orchestra's kind of doing their thing, and the electronics might be playing like backbeat, big loud electronic like drums and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so this sounds like a wonderful, like a really different idea, and talking about using the electronics for something that like the orchestra couldn't do by itself, getting these really precise things.
Right, and so then of course the blend between the two becomes crucial. So you have to design the sounds that they're going to sit with those, with the higher string sounds without, really drawing too much attention to themselves.
How does that work practically? Go ahead.
The sounds just have to behave like real instruments in that way, So you have to be very concerned about the design of the sound itself.
Yeah.
How does in a practical sense, how does the intonation work with something like that? With those harmonics, it would seem that everything would have to be really precise in the orchestra.
Right. The thing is that the fine tuning can be controlled by the keyboardist with a pitch bend wheel.
Ooh.
So yeah.
Very thoughtful.
Yeah. Interesting.
Not only
I wouldn't have thought of that. That's a really nice little safety net.
Yeah.
So this sounds like you're really like challenging your computer player or your keyboard MaxMSP driver, where like not only do they have to like do things roughly in time, which is often like doing different cues and stuff, but they have to play notes and they have to play in tune. Playing a computer in tune is
all there. The thing is, it's all there because all they're really doing is like, maybe holding down a couple of notes on the keyboard, and then they can, they're doing 2 things, three things. They're holding down pitches. These are sustained notes, so they're not, it's not requiring a lot. So it's, they basically are playing on beats or maybe off beats. So it's not rhythmically, it's not very complicated. So they hold down those couple of pitches, and then those, pitches will generate, 4-note chords basically. Nice. And so then they can control the tuning with the pitch bend wheel, and then also the volume. They have to do this, the hairpin, the same hairpins as the string player. So they're doing that with a volume control pedal, MIDI controller 7. So,
So I've not. So like I said, I've done stuff with electronics in small groups. I've not done something with electronics in a big group. What is it like when the audio drivers crash in an orchestra concert?
Well, fortunately, I haven't had that experience, but I remember during the premiere of the piece, when we were rehearsing it, it's an issue because back then we were running it on G3 computers, so the process was like, we're working about like 400 megahertz processors or something. So we're close to maxing these things out, so it was a concern.
Phones these days, for comparison, are well over a gigahertz processor in most phones.
Right. Yeah. You can run this on a $400 laptop.
We got quad-core phones on the market.
Yeah.
So sorry, I just would to
Yeah,
compare for people that aren't computer nerds.
yeah. So, and what we did was, if you take a look at the video that's on my website, you'll see that we actually have two computers set up. So if one happened to crash, we were basically running both at the same time, and both were getting the MIDI data coming in. And so if one crashed, all we had to do was like, switch the audio very quickly to the other computer. So it's like just mute and then turn the other ones on.
Brilliant.
So you have a,
It's like NASA building two space shuttles side by side.
it's the understudy computer. I
Yeah,
like it.
exactly.
Ready
So-
to jump in, they're just waiting for their chance. Yeah.
Well, going along with the whole idea of the frustrations and sometimes, I guess, dangers of doing electronics in any context, really, I'm wondering, like, I was looking at your website, and I might be wrong about this, but it looks like you've had 3 pieces for electronics and orchestra of some form.
Uh-huh.
I was wondering how often do those pieces get performed when you're not present? Because sending an orchestral score off that's just your standard orchestral score,
Mhm.
I would still probably want to be there, but I would feel a lot less nervous about doing that than there's this thing, and you got to have loudspeakers, and you got to have this MaxMSP patch, and I want to know how the speakers sound, and I want to know where the speakers are pointed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So have these pieces been performed a lot in your absence, and what's it like going through that experience knowing that a piece is being performed and you're not there to shepherd it through the process?
I can say the orchestra pieces have not been played without me.
Okay.
But I think that's also maybe the nature of just orchestra music in general. You tend to be more. Those are big events, so you're
Right.
present at them. My other pieces for like solo instrument, like the guitar pieces, for example. When I first started working with David on these we premiered them 7 years ago. He, even though like he started, he grew up playing instruments and started playing guitar seriously when he was probably around 10 or 12. He never really played electric guitar until he was in his mid-40s. Okay, so he wasn't really, adept with this sort of technology. So when I met David, I mean, he basically used his computer for, emailing and this sort of thing,
Right.
word processing. So the challenge there was to make him comfortable enough with the technology that he could go out and play it on his own eventually.
Mhm.
And the first several performances, I was with him. And then, as I said, David, he's a brave guy. So he went out. I remember the first performance he gave on his own was in Calgary, Alberta. And the only thing, he called me a couple days before, and it's sort of like, can you just be by your phone during these hours on Saturday? And sure enough, during the sound check, something had happened, and he called me, and we worked it out, over the course of a couple minutes, and it was fine. And since then, that was just, he had to get past that hump, and after that, he's been fine. He's been doing it on his own. And similarly, a piece that I have for bass clarinet and electronics, people can just do that. It's pretty self-explanatory. So I think that's a challenge as a composer when designing these Max patches, is to make them intuitive and actually that, that they're just going to work. It's going to be as easy as really plugging in a tape, or putting a cassette player in and playing along with it. Sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I have a piece for sax and electronics, and it's been performed without me being present.
Yeah.
And the most important component of that performance was the 2,500 word email or whatever it was that I wrote to the performer, where I was trying to describe exactly plug this into that, blah blah blah, and trying to cover every contingency. And still, when I heard the performance afterward, it's so it's shocking to hear the differences that erupt just because you weren't there to baby it from the very beginning.
Oh yeah.
That's really interesting. It makes me think about music education and how, well, I don't know how it is at your university or all over, but in my experience, performers aren't instructed that they need to know anything about, like, if you're getting a performance degree, you're not expected to know anything about how to plug in a microphone, what a mixing board is, not even the very basics of this kind of thing. What are your thoughts? I mean, I have some strong thoughts, obviously. What are your thoughts about how we should be educating people in college, even performers, regarding this kind of technology?
Well, no, I think it's very important. I mean, this has been part of the world for a good number of decades now. And so the time is well overdue for undergraduates. Now, of course, there are master's degrees starting up specifically directed toward contemporary music performance. The Manhattan School of Music has had one for almost a decade now. Boston Conservatory is launching one next fall. And of course, in those situations, the players have to, the performers, I would imagine, would have to spend a certain amount of time just learning basic technology, because it's part of the contemporary music world now. But generally, I mean, if you're in a music school doing a conservatory type of degree, performance degree, I think, yeah, they should know about recording and just the basics of microphones and really what, the different types of microphones and what they do, these sorts of things.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And, not everyone's going to tour the globe playing violin concerti and this kind of thing. They might end up being a middle school orchestra conductor. And to a lot of the kids growing up nowadays, this is the orchestra they're interested in, a laptop and a mixer. And
Right.
you need to at least be able to engage with your students on some level with something that's that important to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, along those lines, what's it like when you bring all this stuff into an orchestra rehearsal for these? I mean, obviously, BMOP doesn't bat an eye at anything like that these days, but other orchestras might.
Well, you know what the main concern I've had from orchestras, it usually get a call or an email from personnel saying, how loud is it going to be?
Exactly.
Because they don't, and then sometimes when they've done these sorts of pieces in the past, they've had very loud electronic part, and it's usually that's the thing they're most concerned about. Of course, the other side of it, when you're dealing with conductor and other people, sort of like the logistics, how's this going to work? And that's a design. It's also, the design of the electronics issue. When you design these things, they have to fit in the orchestra like any other instrument. So it's sort of like they have to, when you're going through the rehearsal, it just has the electronic part, and who's ever working that has to just sit in there like it's like another bassoon part or something. Sort of like, you cannot intrude in any way on the rehearsal space. It's sort of like, or just the way the conductor is used to rehearsing. So it's like, we're going to start at rehearsal number C now. The electronics just have to be right at that moment. There can't be any wait 5 minutes while I cue that up sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that has to be in the design of the electronics. So it's not, they're just there so the conductor can just go through rehearsal like it's, just like it's any other instrument sitting in the orchestra. So.
Yeah.
And I guess another little detail, I know that a lot of your electronics involves like enhancing the sound of the orchestra or like doing upper harmonics and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do for speaker placement? Do you do it like within the orchestra, in front or behind, or?
Yeah, ideally, it's not in the front. Ideally, this piece is designed with the 6-channel. We'll probably do four speakers at the BMOP concert, but they're placed at the back, basically horseshoed at the back. So
okay.
So
Nice.
They can really get a timbre integrated. If they're at the front, then they're gonna separate out, which is not the idea.
Right.
Yeah, we did a piece at Michigan State. While I was there, Stephen Bryant's Ecstatic Waters. It was with electronics and wind symphony, and that we put the speakers, right in just behind the trombones, and or on one side and then behind other ones on the other side, and as a violist who's often sat in the back of the section just in front of the trombones, it was some little bit of retribution having them.
If you got the speakers right behind the trombones, you should also include in the patch where a little voice whispers to them, "Stop talking." It is trombone players we're talking about after all.
No, and they're some of my best friends at MSU too, so fun to hassle them. But yeah.
So another thing I've thought about quite a bit regarding this kind of performance is if you are, depending on how careful you are about crafting a sound that's going to be generated electronically, it's like I can see myself, if I got very, very controlling in that sense, saying, and the speakers you use have to be in list the specifications of the speakers or an actual model, but they have to be this kind of frequency response and that kind of thing, because that could be a concern. You never know what a different place is going to have regarding gear.
Yeah. No, that's true. But I think that's also, it's not just with the orchestra. That's with any sort of situation. You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've just going back to the guitar and electronics piece. I know that the few times I've been with David at performances, like various guitar festivals or whatever, where he's invited, and sometimes the electronics are, or sorry, the loudspeakers are just okay, and sometimes they're amazing. I remember there was a festival, a little guitar festival at University of California, Davis, about 3 years ago, I think, and their concert hall has this beautiful Meyer sound system in it. So I was like, this is the best this piece ever sounded. I was like, my gosh, this is like, this is just like being in heaven. You got this incredible sound system. We're just like, yeah, we just want to sit in here for the next week or something and just play with this. But that's a very rare situation to have something like that. But it's like anything else, because obviously you can't be dragging your loudspeakers around with you.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Although,
and it's a unique thing for electronic music, right? You're not going to write in your score for this violin sonata that it must be performed on a 1784 Amati whatever, right? Or like that would be insane. Or even a modern, like you're not going to say this must be performed on a Selmer Mark VI, like that. You're not going to get that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, pianists kind of face a similar problem too. Touring pianists face that problem.
Yeah.
So.
You never know what you're going to get.
Exactly.
Yeah. I've often wondered about that, and not being a real pianist in any way, how frustrating that is for them. I can suppose pretty frustrating.
Yeah, I would think it could be quite frustrating.
Well, the superstars kind of bring their own, right? Doesn't like Lang Lang get to bring his own piano?
I don't know about that, actually.
It wouldn't surprise me.
If anybody
He's got a Bugatti.
Yeah, if anybody gets to bring their own piano, it would be him. So the Boston Modern Orchestra concert is coming up. That's their season opener, October 12th. What else is going on for you these days? Plug away.
By the way, I just finished a large piano piece. It's on paper it's about 22 minutes long. It's in 4 parts. That's for Vicky Chow, pianist in New York, who was with Bang on a Can. She's premiering that here in Boston on January 17th. So
Okay.
that was the last thing that I got out. So,
Cool.
Yeah, piano was challenging. It's writing large solo piano pieces it's a challenge.
Yeah.
At least it is for me. So.
Yeah, lots of people have written lots of really good piano music, is what I always think when I consider writing for piano.
Yes.
It's a daunting task to approach, and better piano players than I too. Although I have been told by multiple people that the best piano music they think these days, especially, is written by non-piano players, because it automatically figures out a way to
Do
sort of
different.
break out of the standard sort of tropes that piano music tends to rely on,
Yeah, well, I guess the Ligeti etudes kind of fall into that category.
Yeah, I've actually been obsessing over those etudes lately.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely, and using them as a great way for my composition students to see some very interesting, but ultimately very simple and very understandable melodic development ideas. It's not a trick question, is what I always tell them. Look at what he's doing. This is simple stuff, but it sounds pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Well, should we get into some of our news stories?
Let's dig in.
So, a couple of weeks ago on the show, I said that I didn't care about any more orchestra BS, and I wasn't going to talk about any orchestra labor stuff. And I say that every time, and every time something happens that I feel kind of obligated to bring up that we should probably discuss. So, as we've mentioned previously, the Atlanta Symphony is in a lockout. They missed their first concert, what would have been their first concert of the season, this past Friday evening, as we're recording this at the end of September, and they staged a protest outside the hall. They all wore their concert tails and stood outside the hall and just kind of hung around and drew attention to themselves, because you don't normally see 80 people in in tailcoats hanging around Atlanta. And so that was interesting. Robert Spano, the conductor, was there, which is interesting. And we talked before about a letter that he and several other Atlanta Symphony conductors had written to management, which we said was kind of unusual. Usually music directors stay out of that kind of thing. And he was also not only writing that letter, but was physically present, greeting people at that event on Friday night. And then more relevant to us this morning on Composerly podcast is the open letter from a group of composers. And this is really interesting. They had, according to the editor's note from Frank Gioteri on New Music Box, had originally just independently posted this to their Facebook pages, and it had since gotten picked up and aggregated in a number of different places, including New Music Box. And so these are a list of composers, and as we've said before, Atlanta Symphony is a big venue for composers, especially people that are writing this really accessible stuff for a big group of orchestra fans. They're a pretty important ensemble. They do a lot of new works, and they commission a lot of works. And so it's a huge issue for us as composers when this orchestra goes on strike. We said the same thing about Minnesota last week. I hope that's not an indication that there could be problems with an orchestra, that they do a lot of new music, because Minnesota and Atlanta certainly do a lot. But this letter is from John Adams, John Corigliano, Nick Demos, Steve Everett, Michael Gandolfi, Osvaldo Golov, Mark Gray, Jennifer Higdon, John Anthony Lennon, Jonathan Leshnoff, Richard Pryor, Adam Schoenberg, Alvin Singleton, and Christopher Theophanitis. So a pretty big list of some pretty big composers writing in support of the Atlanta Symphony. Now, I should say they never really explicitly back the musicians in this letter. They don't mention the musicians in particular, and they don't criticize the management in particular. They're pretty safe about some of the language in here. They're mostly just expressing their dissatisfaction with the fact that the orchestra is not playing. We are, quote, "We are appalled to see the orchestra's supremely talented players locked out from playing their concerts, while at the same time being asked to accept painful salary cuts and submitting to the reduction in the size and quality of their ensemble." So that's about as close as they got to saying, to accusing anyone of mismanagement or of bad dealing and locking out the musicians.
Right.
Were you going to say something, Sam?
It's more like an open plea to the stakeholders involved to solve the situation.
Mm-hmm.
It should be noted that the Minnesota Orchestra had their season opener, what it would have been on, I guess, the 26th. So 2 days ago, as we're recording this.
So congratulations to them.
Yeah, after only a 16 months of negotiation, they're finally back at it. We hope sincerely that we don't see something similar to that in Atlanta.
Indeed.
Right. Well, and we also hope that we don't see this reflected back in Minnesota, because this is the second time in not that long for the Atlanta Symphony.
Right.
So hopefully the Minnesota's agreement is going to last a little bit longer there than Atlanta did here. So,
yes. So speaking of infuriating things that we don't really want to talk about but feel obligated, the Klinghoffer madness continues for the Met.
Yes. They started their season. The Metropolitan Opera started their season this past week.
Was not Klinghoffer.
Was not Klinghoffer, but they started playing other things.
Yes.
And because the season started and the Adams Death of Klinghoffer was still on the calendar for the season, there were protesters all over the hall, and it's been all over the news and social media all over again, and it is still very frustrating. And I still feel as though the people who are angry have either not read or seen the opera, or are lying about having read or seen the opera, or just don't understand what they're reading.
Right.
Because it's not. This is not an anti-Semitic work. There are anti-Semitic characters in the work, and they're bad people, but the thing that the work does, interestingly, is describe them as people. And nobody would say that, when they watch Silence of the Lambs, that it is shilling for psychopaths and serial killers, right? And the thing that makes Silence of the Lambs uncomfortable for people is that you get to really know a really scary dude. And that is what Klinghoffer does in a lot of ways, is you get to see these really scary, really seriously evil dudes, but you see them as people. And you get to a little bit of insight into maybe some of their motivations and what may have led them to the point at which they're arrived, where they're throwing helpless people off of the boat, shooting people and throwing them off of a boat, and really callously doing horrible, heinous things to other human beings for seeming like no personal affront that this person had made to them. And I think that's just the thing that makes people uncomfortable. And also, anytime it seems that there's just a point in a conversation about religion where if somebody acknowledges that the other side are not comic book villains, then they are horribly evil people.
Right.
And it just stops the conversation. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, in case anybody out there doesn't know, we talked about the protests earlier because they were aimed, or I don't know if they were specifically aimed, but the result was that the Met canceled their HD broadcast or webcast of the Death of Klinghoffer performance, and so now they're back at it trying to get the actual performance itself canceled. So anyway, I wish people were better informed, and I wish we could have a real conversation about this instead of just a knee-jerk, I'm going to continuously restate my opinion, and there's not any real dialogue going on.
Yeah. I wrote a piece on Medium about this back when the simulcast was canceled that you should read.
I read it.
Okay.
Yes, it was good. Ronald, do you have any thoughts about this? It's kind of a charged topic to bring you in on.
Yes, we just laid out a minefield for you if you'd like to walk through it.
No, I think it is. I mean, it's like a lot of situations of this nature where extremes can run, and this is clearly what's happening here. It's not. Sometimes it's not about. After a while, it's not about the piece itself. It becomes about something else, and I think we might be heading in that territory now. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's obviously.
One indication that we're headed to another territory where it's talking about something else is that Daniel Pearl's mother wrote a letter to the editor that the New York Times published. Like, I don't think we're talking about opera anymore when we're talking about Daniel Pearl.
Yeah. Right. It's frustrating to me that I think you could probably characterize the people who are very much up in arms about this as being liberal people, right? Wanting to espouse liberal points of view and the liberal idea of not being racist and equality and all these kinds of things. It just seems like there's a lot better things that if people want to get upset about something and go out in the streets and rant and rave about something, there are things that are far more important than an opera that's been around since the
91
80s.
1981.
Yeah, it's been around for 25 years. So all you guys go and vent that energy on something else that's more important than this opera. Speaking of things that are important. that's a terrible segue, but that's all I can do. You guys might remember Joshua Bell several years ago.
Never heard of him.
Who is that guy? Remember the story about the guy in Spain that looked just like Joshua Bell and used that as a way to get into his hotel room and stole some stuff out of his hotel room in Spain?
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with this, but I just remembered that just now.
Yeah, who's that guy? Yeah, right.
That guy that looks like Joshua Bell. So in 2007, Joshua Bell performed an experiment where he went to, I guess it was the same location, the Union Square in Washington, and did the typical "I'm the performer, going to open up my case and play." So this is Joshua Bell, who, you know, your upper middle class person who considers themselves at least moderately cultured because of the red violin and his sort of pops concert touring things that he's done. There's a good chance they're going to know that name, right? But Joshua Bell went and played for change and got nothing. He made
this was a study in the Washington Post, and it won a Pulitzer, and it was a stupid article, and it shouldn't win a Pulitzer.
Yeah, but it was an interesting experiment, but it shouldn't have won a Pulitzer. So no one noticed that he was doing this. So you got this world-class violinist that probably lots of the same people who completely ignored him, if we're told the name, would feel obligated to, give the cultural capital due to Joshua Bell. So he's going to try that again, going to be September 30th. And it's weird that they're advertising. I don't know, did they advertise that it was going to happen?
No, the idea the last time was it was supposed to be a surprise.
Yeah, well, I mean, your average subway goer is probably not listening to SoundNotion. So I don't know how much effect saying that it's going to be September 30th at 12:30 p.m. at Washington's Union Station.
I don't appreciate you underselling the size of our audience.
That's right. That's right. So anyway, the thing is that it might inspire some true music nerds to show up just to and see what's going on. I would be willing to bet we're going to get a heavy video / social media documentation of it. Since, I mean, I'm getting this information from the WQRX blog, which, if you're into classical music at all, there's a good chance that you at least have a passing relationship with that, the station and their blog. So we'll be curious to see what happens. I'm sure that we'll get reports right after that goes down as to what the response was.
I'm sure someone will have video of it on Vine while the thing is still happening.
I was about to say, there will be a Ustream of it happening in real time, probably. So
there you go.
We'll keep our eyes
peeled.
Talking.
Yeah,
so
we're talking.
What I mean is,
the most amazing violinist playing the subway, right?
You won't believe what happens next.
Yeah. What I meant to say was there will be a live stream, won't there? Internet. So we're counting on you, Internet. Don't disappoint us.
Well, it's going to be a very different event with people knowing in advance.
Right.
I didn't pay too much attention to the story when it came out, whenever it was, 7 years ago. But I did see this little clip, and it was a typical subway scene. People were just rushing from one place to the next. I mean, their concerns were elsewhere. So it doesn't surprise me that people just didn't stop and listen. I mean.
Yeah. Well,
that's why I'm so angry about the conclusion they reached. Like, they were trying to test whether the quality of the music really mattered to people, and if they had a really good performance, if people would actually come and stop and listen. And that's not a place for stopping and doing anything. It is a place that is designed and purposefully built to get you out of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
And if
you're only there because you're trying to get somewhere else.
And if you're talking about how, quote, good a piece of music is, I think context to me always matters to some degree, but in that situation, context matters very, very much. I can't remember his name, but we did a short blurb about that unbelievably energetic street performer who plays saxophone. Remember this?
Oh, yeah.
And I can't remember his name, but he does like Michael Jackson and dances around.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't characterize him in the conservatory way of talking about it, a good saxophone player at all. But he was very good at making people listen to him. So how can you argue that he's not a fantastic musician? He grabs his audience, he keeps them captivated, and he inspires them to pull cash out of their pockets and give it to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I think, though, I will say that this is a really interesting way to give a performance, and I think that we should find ways to present the best of the things that we do to people that would not ordinarily experience it. Mm-hmm. Though I think saying that this is a reprise of the thing that he did all those years ago that was kind of the secret, goof on people is not right. But I think it is absolutely, just as Ronald was saying, a different thing, but I think it's also a thing that's worth doing. And I think it's not a coincidence that the last paragraph here says, Bell says the goal is to promote music education. He'll be accompanied by 9 students, he mentioned. He also has a new album debuting the same day and an upcoming HBO special.
Yeah. Merch table by the
ticket
counter or whatever.
Right.
T-shirts at the table in the back.
Yeah. And I begrudge
like us
him
on Facebook.
I begrudge him not one bit for that,
Not at all. Not at all.
If I were Joshua Bell, I would be leveraging my Joshua Bellness to make money at every opportunity I had.
Let's leave it there. Sam will be leveraging his Joshua Bellness.
Yes.
Ronald, where can people find you on the internet?
My full name.com, ronaldbrucesmith.com.
Excellent.
It is a fine website too.
Definitely check that out. It is an excellent website, and it has lots of great recordings and even some scores up there. So that's a really great place to look for some cool stuff. And we will have links to that and all manner of other things in the show notes for this episode. We'll include links to all the stories that we talked about, including some new things that Sam is going to find, because that's how we roll. And you'll find those things at soundnotion.tv/SN. You can also leave a comment there. You can like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. You can leave a comment on our site. You can leave a comment in the YouTube video for this. You can follow us on Twitter. We're as a group at SoundNotion. I'm at Dave McDowell. Nate is at AnnateTree. Sam is at HouseGoy. And we would love to continue this conversation. I've been arguing with people about the death of Klinghoffer on Twitter this week, and I would be happy to argue with you about it as well. You can find me at Dave McDowell. Though I do not suffer fools.
Yes, we want a dialogue. Don't just continuously restate your opinion as if that's going to make anything happen.
You can subscribe to this show and all of our other anti-Semitic shows in the iTunes store, and get your podcast however you like to get your podcast downloaded automatically to your favorite anti-Semitic devices. If you'd like to support our show, you can do so by telling your friends about us, leaving a review in any of those places that let you leave reviews about things. You can use the Amazon affiliate search on our site if you're buying a regular thing on Amazon. If you just find it through the little search box on our site, it doesn't cost you anything extra, but we get a little commission, and that helps a lot. Thank you to those of you who have been doing that already. And if you'd like to support us in other ways, there are PayPal donation links there as well. Thank you again to the people that have done that as well. SoundNotion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gullo, who we hope is feeling better. He's very sick this week. Send him your well wishes. He is at Vox Shibuya on Twitter. But our introduction remains by Patrick Gullo, and we will see you back next week.